Welcome, everyone. Thanks for being with us here today. We're going to be talking about intervening in employee disputes and how to best go about that. Before we get started, a couple things I'd like to mention. First, I'd like to acknowledge the land I'm speaking to you from today as the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. The area now known as Toronto, the city skyline displayed on the screen now, is covered by Treaty 13 and the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, which bound inhabitants to share the territory and protect the land. And as a settler, I strive to share in this promise. So today we're talking about intervening in employee disputes, why you need to address them, when you as a manager may need to intervene, and when a tool like mediation may be the appropriate process. Employee disputes can be difficult to deal with, and so my goal today is to give you some clarity around what your role is there and give you some tips on how you can handle these situations when they come up. And I really wanted to highlight mediation today. I actually do get asked what mediation is sometimes. And so one of the things I try to do as part of my work is to really let people know about it as a dispute resolution process and how helpful it can be. More on that later. I'll tell you a little bit more about me first. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Saira Albo. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm an HR consultant and certified workplace mediator and trainer that helps employees and organizations reduce the time, costs, and stress associated with destructive workplace conflicts. I got into doing this work because I had been through some pretty nasty workplace conflicts myself. They went on for a long time and did a real number on my health and my mental health. It took a while to come back from that. And through the process of talking to other people about what I had gone through, friends were sharing their stories with me as well. And I just remember thinking, wow, there is way too much of this going on in the workplace. And so I set out to figure out how to do something about it. My background from many years ago was in mental health. So I started there and got certified in psychological health and safety, which is a workplace focus on supporting the mental health of employees, preventing harm, and responding to incidents as they come up. The whole framework around this, but overall, it sets a really solid foundation for running a business or an organization. And so as I was talking to people about their mental health and how it was impacted in their workplace, so often it was coming back to an interpersonal dispute, either between employees, between managers and employees, or even between partners and co-founders, or between board members. Don't even get me started on family businesses. So that's what led me to mediation. It's a much more specific support in these kinds of situations. My style is less focused on the settlement aspect, like that would be more of like a settling out of court situation. I'm a lot more focused on repair and rebuilding relationships because that's what's really happening in the workplace. We spend so much time there with people that we didn't necessarily choose to work with. They may have different personalities, working styles, communication styles, and different needs, goals, priorities, and life experiences. We are going to get into situations where we don't agree. So my goal is to help people have these difficult conversations when they need to and still work collaboratively and be engaged in their organization and to move through the pain and stress that may come with these situations. Because I've been there. I know how awful it can be and how hard it is to keep showing up through that. So we have a special guest with us here today as well. I thought it would be helpful to go over when dispute resolution or mediation is not appropriate. And so my friend and licensed workplace investigator, Saira Gangji of hrology, is here with us today to let you know when an investigation is the appropriate route. We're actually going to start with that early on, and she's going to let you know how to get in touch with her if this is the kind of route you want to take or you need to take and have more questions. She's also got a fantastic program that she's just developed. If you need to handle this, if you're going to handle it in your workplace yourself, she's going to tell you about that as well. At the end, I'll talk more about where mediation can help and how to work with me. At the end, as usual, we'll have some time for questions. So now let me pass it over to Saira to talk about when a workplace investigation is the appropriate to take in an escalated, the appropriate route to take in an escalated situation.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much, Sarah, for having me here today. So my name is Saira Gangji. I am a licensed workplace investigator, and my pronouns are she and her. So I grew up in Toronto, and I now hail from Calgary. I have 20 plus years of HR experience. I have a master's of industrial relations and human resources. And during the pandemic, late last year, I created an online course for HR professionals called the Workplace Investigation Bootcamp. So I'm going to talk to you about when a workplace investigation may be necessary. So, for example, when a mediation might not be the right route to take. So a workplace investigation may be necessary where there's a legal requirement. So, for example, occupational health and safety legislation in Canada, according to that legislation, employers must investigate any incident of harassment or violence. And what that means, or what that entails, it means that they need to take actions to address the incident and prepare a report outlining the circumstances at hand, the process that was undertaken, the actions that were taken to address and resolve the incident or incidents, and to identify the measures taken to prevent this situation from happening again. Secondly, it might be more appropriate to use a workplace investigation to investigate serious or severe allegations. And these would include issues related to discrimination, bullying, harassment, violence, threats of violence, or a toxic workplace. Another situation where a workplace investigation might be the right route to take is where there is a lack of psychological safety. So if people do not feel safe to bring their concerns forward in a mediation process, or they're reluctant to participate because they fear some sort of, retaliation, or they don't trust leaders or the mediator to act from a place of integrity, then a workplace investigation might be the more appropriate lane to choose. And finally, a workplace investigation might be the right route to take if you've had an unsuccessful mediation process. So oftentimes what will happen is people will get into a mediation related to something fairly benign, related to, let's say, tensions between two employees. But as you dig into the mediation process, it becomes clear that this isn't really just about tensions between two employees. It's around issues related to bullying or harassment. And at that point in time, it would be the right route to take to suspend the mediation process and trigger a workplace investigation process. So one of the most common questions that I get asked as a workplace investigator is, when should you investigate? And I have a 4-part test that I apply when determining whether an investigation should proceed. And the test is here on the screen, but it says, if the allegations or complaint are true, does the behavior violate the law or your organization's policies? If the allegations or complaint are true, does the behavior increase your organization's exposure to risk, whether that be legal or reputational risk? The third part of the test is, if the allegations or complaint are true, does the behavior cause harm to your employees, whether it be physical harm, mental harm, emotional harm, or psychological harm? The final the final part to the test is, if the allegations or complaint are true, does the behavior negatively impact your workplace environment or workplace culture? And I would argue that if the answer to any or all of these questions is yes, then a workplace investigation should proceed. So mediations and workplace investigations are not mutually exclusive. They often impact each other. So for example, it's not uncommon, as I already mentioned, for a mediation to be suspended and for an investigation to be triggered. It's also very common for me as a workplace investigator, at the end of the investigation, as part of my recommendations, it's common for me to recommend mediation as a follow-up process to restoring the workplace. So mediations can support restoring the workplace following an investigation. And this tends to happen where the two parties are both going to remain employed with the organization. They have to continue to work together, and that means they have to figure out how they're going to work together. So following a workplace investigation, the goal of a mediation is to build understanding and communication, along with a specific agreement on how to deal with concerns. So mediators, from my point of view, can create a safe space. They are able to help the parties in conflict communicate more effectively about their areas of disagreement, how they're both feeling, and support them to contract how they're going to work together. So that would come down to the need to haves, the nice to haves, clear boundaries, and what to do if things aren't working. So during the pandemic, I created the Workplace Investigation Bootcamp. And what it is it's a self-led, step-by-step online course for HR professionals to equip them to lead workplace investigations with ease, confidence, integrity, and the best possible outcomes. So when I created this course, I wanted it to be different from all the other courses that I've taken. In courses that I've taken before, I do find that they equip you with the what and the why, but they don't teach you the how. So for me, when I would leave these courses armed with so much information, I would be excited about it, but I wouldn't be quite sure how to implement. And I wanted to intentionally design this course to make sure that I delivered the how. So in the course, I share the exact process that I use in my investigation practice. I share all of the templates that will help you to navigate each step of the workplace investigation process. And I basically share everything that I can with you that I've used to conduct over 100 investigations. So it's a course that's online and it's self-led. It's for busy HR professionals who prefer to learn at their own pace in their own time. Everything's online. So as long as you have internet access and access to Google Drive, you can access it from anywhere. And once you enroll, you will have access to any future updates to the course. The third way I intentionally designed this course to be different is that, from my perspective, real learning comes from applying the concepts and implementing them organically. And, from my perspective, that doesn't always happen in one day. So with the Workplace Investigation Bootcamp, you also get access to a private Facebook community where you can continue to ask questions, share wins, and get support. So the program itself is comprised of 6 modules. There are short, digestible videos. There's text lessons that are included for a deeper dive on the content. There's actionable workbooks and a case study to support practical learning and implementation. And I've included 15 done-for-you templates to help you navigate each step of the process. There's some other bonuses in there that are included. So Saira was actually kind enough to test the course for me. And as a special gift today, when she sends out the recording, she's also going to be sending you the link to my website and the link to the course. If you decide to register for the course and you decide to pay in full, then you can get $149 off the pay in full price until March 17th. So Sarah's going to send out the discount code. I should have mentioned that the full price of the course is $14.97 Canadian dollars. And as I said, with the discount code that Sarah's going to be sending out, you can get $149 if you pay in full. And if you have any questions about the course, feel free to email me or send me a DM through social media. And on the next slide, it has all of my contact points. So thanks so much for having me. And if you have any questions about workplace investigations, feel free to check out my website, my blog, follow me on social media for some tips. And thanks again, Saira, so much for having me.
Oh, thank you so much, Saira. I'm really glad that you were able to be here. I wanted to make sure I was leading with this because I really want people to understand that there is a legal requirement here and not everything is appropriate for alternative dispute resolution. Didn't want anyone going through this presentation thinking that they've got to mediate a harassment claim or anything like that. While mediation can be involved in the process, it may not be appropriate or the starting point. There's other systems in place that might be what you need to use in your situation. So anyways, please feel free to connect with Saira, or you can message her in the chat. I'll be sending out her info with the slides, as she mentioned, with the special discount good until March 17th, 2022 for the Workplace Investigation Bootcamp. Like she said, I had a chance to test this out before she launched it. And it is a phenomenal program. It's easy to follow. Everything's clearly explained. And she really did throw in everything you need to know to do your own workplace investigation. I mean, the templates are, everything is there for you. So thanks again, Saira. So let me move into situations that may be appropriate for EDR. First, let me define what we're talking about when we say workplace conflict. So that's when two or more people in the workplace who are task interdependent, so they have to work together on something or interact regularly. They may have challenging emotions like anger or frustration towards one another. They may be finding fault with one another, and they are using behaviors that are causing a business problem. This definition comes to us from the Mediation Training Institute at Eckerd College. That's where I've done one of my several trainings. And I like this one because it keeps something in the forefront for us that I'm going to come back to throughout. What's the business problem? I realize that might sound a little bit insensitive. We are talking about people here, but it can be useful for a couple of reasons. It can give you something that the people have in common to work towards. So it's more of an us versus the problem rather than me versus you. This can be a really helpful reframe for people in conflict. And at the same time, it may give you the consequences of not dealing with the conflict. The impact is bigger than just the employees or the manager if they're involved. There's a business impact there or an organizational impact. And we're talking about situations where the parties could come to a voluntary agreement that works for everyone involved. So I also wanted to show you where workplace conflicts can go from more everyday conversations to something more heated or escalated. This is from an assessment tool I use called the Conflict Dynamics Profile. It's also from the Mediation Training Institute. I love using this because it's a self-assessment where you identify the behaviors that you see yourself using in conflict based on a number of questions that they ask you. It's not a personality assessment or a judgment that you're doing something wrong. It's just a snapshot in time showing where your default behaviors in conflict may be constructive or destructive. So it starts with a precipitating event or what's brought on the conflict, or something they call hot buttons. So these are things that other people do or types of behavior that you find really frustrating or irritating in your workplace. Things like micromanaging or being unreliable. Those are some things that may initiate conflict in the workplace. And then what typically happens is you have a constructive or destructive response, something that's going to prolong or escalate the conflict, or something that helps it move towards a resolution. So I'm making this sound pretty easy and straightforward, and I know that it isn't. In the moment, it can be really difficult to make a concerted effort to use a constructive behavior rather than a destructive one. An example of a constructive behavior would be, something like perspective taking, where we're trying to put ourselves in the shoes of the other person and understand things from their point of view. And I think I say this every time, but no one is born good at conflict resolution. We don't always learn these skills along the way. So your employees may have more of a tendency to use destructive behaviors. And I'm not trying to say that they don't know any better, but they may need support and education to get to a place of using more constructive behaviors. So the kinds of conflict I'm talking about here today that I encourage you to view as potentially constructive are the kinds that occur frequently in our day-to-day lives. Could be a difference of ideas, interests, priorities, or due to stress, but it's situations that can potentially be resolved by bringing the parties together for an open and honest dialogue. Because there are actually benefits of conflict. It can be constructive because it can help us identify a larger problem or an underlying problem in the organization. You might increase transparency since people are actually talking about issues. Conflict can help clarify or improve policies and procedures. It can lead to transformation and social change. Ultimately, when we're talking about conflict, it's a normal part of life, and it can be helpful to view it that way. Some of the benefits of conflict resolution are that it can help the persons involved to be heard, which can facilitate emotional processing, strengthen their relationship, and build trust. By hearing someone out, you might also shift your perspective and be able to better generate creative ideas to move towards a resolution. It helps us to take ownership of our own role in the conflict. And it can increase a sense of safety or demonstrate willingness on the part of the organization to address issues. And it strengthens organizational culture when it supports issues being raised. people may feel more safe to come forward without retaliation, and problems can be addressed before they get out of control. This is also a part of psychological health and safety. So how do you know, either as a manager, when you should step in versus letting your employees handle it themselves, or as someone involved in the conflict, when you might want to get assistance? And before I go over these, let me just say that I'm going to give you some suggestions here. And in the end, it's going to be your call in terms of how you move forward, in accordance with your organization's policies and procedures to the extent that you have them, and the legal frameworks that are involved. And I also want to preface this with the idea that this kind of thing needs to be built into your organization's culture. You want to have trust and transparency as foundational elements so that your employees are comfortable coming to you with these things in the first place. That's also an aspect of psychological health and safety. So let's start at the bottom here with empowering employees to handle it themselves. So this is where I would look a little bit more at the context. Has this been going on for a while? Who's involved? What's being impacted? If it's not particularly escalated or hasn't been going on for a long time, you may want to try to get the employees to deal with it themselves as a starting point. This is for, I'd love to tell you that this is the preferred option as a starting point. That may not be the case for you. That's my opinion on it. But here's a reason that it's can be helpful. You want to give your employees autonomy and trust them. You want to demonstrate that you believe that they're capable. You also want them handling their own business. You want to empower them to deal with their own conflicts. Otherwise, are you prepared to be stepping in all the time? How frequently do you want to do that? This gives them the opportunity to create their own relationships and learn the skills they need to do so. Some circumstances when this would be the appropriate route include there's an ongoing interdependent relationship. We mentioned that earlier. So the employees need to collaborate on something in the future or as part of their roles. There's a business problem they can solve by changing their behavior towards one another. The intensity is fairly low, so it's not just an everyday, not ideal interaction. It's also not a crisis, and there's no risk of physical harm or violence. The power differential is either not an issue or there's a low risk of reprisal, so you're not really dealing with somebody who's abusing their authority. And so this might be an actual power differential like job status, or it could also be marginalization. So please keep an eye out for that. And lastly, do the employees feel resourced and like they have the capacity to handle their own conflicts? So you have a decision point here, and I would encourage you to look at, why you're considering or not considering stepping in, and keep an eye on your own avoidance response if that's something you think may be impacting your decision to get them to deal with it. And if you do decide that it's up to them to handle it, getting their buy-in to move forward without you. So if one person's hesitant, you could check out, what's stopping you or holding you back from speaking with, the other person. And just a tip here, try to use both of their names. It's a way of rehumanizing the other person and helping to get them out of that, the villain role that the person may have them in, the person bringing the conflict to you. If, on the other hand, though, if that's actually having the effect of stressing them out more, you might have a deeper problem and not something that's just a bit of a blip in the relationship. So check that out as well. You can remind them of the concept of us versus the problem instead of me versus you. You can work with them a little bit on what they would like to happen differently or what they need going forward, so they can have that forward focus as they're going into the conversation instead of just rehashing what happened in the past. And even if you're letting the employees handle it themselves, follow up with them. So if one person has brought this to you, check back in with them to see how it went. Again, demonstrating that care and trust. If this was two people or you've heard from both of them individually, then check back in with both so you can see what they've agreed to. You don't necessarily need to know the content of their conversation, but you need to know what they've committed to doing going forward and what support they may need from you to do so. If they try this route and it doesn't work, then you might need to be involved in the discussion. So let's talk about that next. So you may need to step in and mediate for your employees if they're unable to resolve the situation themselves, or perhaps the situation has escalated, or the employees may be refusing to deal with it. And that's no slight against them. They may not have the capacity to handle it themselves. And I'll say it again, no one's born being good at conflict resolution. We don't necessarily learn these skills along the way. Or there might be a power differential involved, either perceived or actual. There might be a more significant impact to a business outcome, so one that might require you to speed things up a little bit. So I'm of the opinion that dealing with employee disputes is a part of your role if you are a manager or a people leader. One of my past instructors said that anyone dealing with people should have mediation training, and I highly agree with that. I don't necessarily mean that you have to be a mediator, but your employees need to know that they can come to you for support, to support them to do their work. And mediation is a tool that you can use to facilitate this dialogue when you need to. So what is mediation? Mediation is considered a part of alternative dispute resolution, or ADR, which is sometimes also called appropriate dispute resolution. It really just means that you're using a neutral third party to facilitate a dialogue between two or more people. And in terms of the resolution process, there's a few things that make it different than something like litigation or going through the legal system that way. So mediation is not about finding fault or placing blame. So I'm not saying that these things are bad. There are times when they're appropriate and maybe necessary, just not necessarily conducive to resolving a conflict. So as a mediator, I'm not on a fact-finding mission when I'm speaking to the parties. I'm interested in how they've been impacted and what they need to move forward. The details of the story aren't necessarily, as important to doing this. Both perspectives are valid and need to be understood. So I'm not looking for evidence like you would in an investigation, like Saira was talking about earlier. Mediation is where the parties are the ones who come up with the resolution that works for them. It's not being imposed on them by someone else. So ideally, this is what makes it a lasting solution. It's confidential and without prejudice. So that means that what's discussed during the mediation stays there. Nothing that's said can be used in court if there are later legal proceedings. It's supposed to be a place of good faith to try to get something resolved, not to try to get information out of someone that can be used against them later. And there's different forms of mediation. I'm not going to get into these today, but you might also hear terms like evaluative or restorative mediation. So what does a mediator do? So first and foremost, a mediator is there to create a safe environment for discussion. Here's a few ways that we do that. With listening skills. This is really trying to go beyond what the person is saying to find what's under the surface, what's important to them, what parts of their identity or their values have been impacted, emotional responses. We also try to establish trust and rapport. So both sides feeling like they have the ability to be involved in the process and that they can trust you to hold the process. So for example, if you say no insults and you let someone keep insulting the other person, they're going to have a hard time trusting you in the process. You're not standing by what you said initially. So this also includes confidentiality. Participants need to trust that they can be open in the room and that there won't be repercussions for that. Staying calm. While the emotions of the participants may escalate, it's critical that you're able to stay present and model a calm environment so they can move through challenging emotions when they come up. We don't choose what emotions we experience or to what intensity. While we can choose our reactions to them, or we can work to do that, we've got to make space for these in difficult conversations. Some people will call, what we do trying to be, neutral or impartial, meaning that you're not on either person's side. I like to look at this a little bit differently and use the term omnipartiality. That's one from another instructor of mine. And that basically means that you're on both their sides. And I include the side of the resolution in that as well. Creativity can also be important. It's not that you're giving them solutions. You might do a little bit more of this as a manager, just given that you have information about the organization and its policies that maybe the employees don't. But it's about seeing more opportunities than just the issues in question, and really trying to help broaden the perspective of the people that are there. And then lastly, here, communication skills. So especially questioning and reframing. And I know I've said this before about staying away from why questions, because that can make people a little defensive. So you can use things like, oh, could you say more about that? Or what's important to you about that? Or even just, anything else you'd like to add, just to keep the discussion going and try to deepen it a little bit. Let me give you a quick example of reframing too, because I think this is one of the hardest things to do here. It really goes a long way. So say someone says, I'm tired of this person being overly sensitive. It's like I can't say anything about their work without it being a problem. A reframe might sound something like, so it's really important that you're able to give feedback in a way that's taken constructively. So we're getting at one of the issues there and what the underlying interest is for the person that's expressed that. Another thing to consider here is whether or not the employees actually want to come to a resolution. You certainly can't force anyone to go through mediation. So how do you get the employees to even come to the table? So this is where some work needs to be done with each of them first and have the conversation about what coming together for a discussion would look like. I don't recommend just putting people in a room, making them talk to each other. Give them the opportunity to provide their consent and help them understand what the possibilities are so they can come to that decision themselves, be more invested in the process and creating the outcome. You can make the request for them to participate and acknowledge any objections that come up. You can try to show the benefits of engaging in the process or potential consequences to the employees for not engaging. What are the impacts there? Your goals in the conflict resolution might be different from there, so you may need to spend some time on what are they hoping the resolution will be or what they want to get out of the process. In terms of consequences, I don't mean threatening them, especially not with something like job security, but what might something appropriate be here that's lost as a result of this conflict or not resolving the conflict? Could be something like their stress level is going to continue to rise, so losing their peace of mind or enjoyment or passion for the job that they used to have. Again, this is where the business impact also comes in handy because you can tie participation in the process to this. One of the things to also keep in mind here, we're not using mediation as a training opportunity. So if that's, if it's something like job competency, that's going to look different. Like that's not something that we would use mediation for. So there's a set of steps that we typically follow in the mediation process. So we start by setting the table or having a conversation about the conversation. Here we're explaining the process, our role, setting out ground rules, especially things like not interrupting or insulting the other person, really trying to set a positive and productive tone for the mediation. We want to start by even thanking the participants for showing up and doing the work of trying to come to a resolution. We also want to express optimism. It can be really hard for participants to see where we're going at the start. So continuously reinforcing that we're making progress, encouraging them goes a long way. Just believing in them and the potential for a resolution helps to keep them engaged. Then we get to participants telling the story. So each person has some time to share their perspective on what happened. It's likely that they're going to have very different versions here. Can start to set off a bit of an argument about what happened. Just bring them back to the ground rules of not interrupting and remind them that they're also going to have a chance to share their perspective. You might want to ask for clarification on something that was said here, but it can be really helpful to just let each side get it out first before starting more of the discussion. Less so about what happened in the past and trying to get the facts there. Yes, you're going to be going over some of that, but the focus is more on what they need to move forward. If someone is really stuck on what happened in the past, I would acknowledge that, acknowledge it's important to them and check in with them about what they're hoping to get out of the mediation. What are they hoping for in terms of a resolution? What happens if they don't come to a resolution? These are questions that bring them back to the present and the future focus. And this might be a conversation that you want to have with them privately, not necessarily when everybody's in the room, but something to check out. Once we start getting into more of a discussion, this is where we're trying to find each side's interests. These are the needs that they're trying to get met. Now, they may have a position that they're coming to the table with, and it's helpful to understand why that position is important to them, because you may need to help find another way to meet their needs. So a pretty extreme example is if an employee wanted the other person fired. It'd be important to find out why don't they want them working there anymore? What would that do for them if they weren't in the organization? Is it that they want the person punished for something, or is there an issue with working with them or for them? Do they want to see if the organization is taking their complaints seriously and doing something about it? What's underneath that demand that they're making? Once you have an idea of what would help the parties move forward, next we go over the issues. So these are the things that are getting in the way of the parties being able to move forward. Might be a couple issues that you have to deal with. Then we get into the brainstorming options. Once we've gotten to this point, we're trying to figure out what are some of the things that will satisfy the interests of both sides. So questions could look like, how can one person, this person, for example, manage their employees effectively and make sure that everyone's treated respectfully. So we're involving both parties in the options that come up. And it's helpful to point out that during this phase, we're just suggesting ideas, nothing's being committed to, and it's helpful if we don't criticize them, so people feel free to share their ideas. We usually put them up on something everyone in the room can see if that's available for you. I'll use a Google Doc and share my screen when I'm on Zoom. Being in a management position in this situation, you might provide a little more guidance on specific things if they involve like an organizational policy or other employees. But for the most part, you want the solution to come from the parties so they're invested in it and satisfied with it. The resolution wasn't imposed on them. They created it, and therefore they've got the ownership of it and are more likely to stick with it. And then there's closure. Here we confirm what was agreed to, make sure it's something that both sides can work with and has the potential to be a lasting solution. You can also do trial resolutions, like let's try this for a couple weeks or a couple months, and and then revisit it to see how it's worked. That can also be really helpful with mediation, is to come back and check up on it periodically and make sure that these things are continuing the way that that the people had agreed to. When situations are particularly contentious or there's safety considerations, a mediator might keep the parties separate and go back and forth with messages. It's called a shuttle mediation. This might be a really helpful first step. I would say that for people that need to work together in the future, it's likely going to be more effective if they are in the same room talking to each other with a facilitator, provided that there are safety measures in place when necessary. If you have to mediate an employee dispute online, you can still do this via video conference. I think we're all quite used to having moved everything to Zoom at this point. And I would just suggest checking in with each party separately before bringing them into the room together. You can do this via breakout rooms. So not having people just log into the main room or coming in as soon as they log on just gives you a little bit more time to control the process and make sure you can check the temperature and set a positive tone for the meeting. And it also makes sure that if somebody's a couple minutes late, the mediator's not sitting with the other person for however long that takes. It just bring everyone in at the same time and just set that fair process. I also recommend taking more breaks here. Zoom fatigue is real. And you want to make sure that everybody's participating fully to the extent that they can. So checking in throughout, letting people take short breaks away from the computer when they need them. One other thing to keep in mind during the mediation process, people will, the parties will typically be, talking to you and trying to convince you of one thing or another. And again, that's not our job as mediators to decide who's right and who's not. It's about listening to both, but it's also encouraging the parties or the people involved to talk to each other. So if you find that they're, they may start off doing that where they're talking more to you, it can really help to just encourage them to talk to each other. That's the foundation that you're trying to build through this process, and that's what you want them doing going forward. So I definitely, you'll probably have to remind them a few times, and that's totally fine, but just, bringing them back to that, talking to each other. I want to show you one more visualization of the mediation process, because I think it's helpful to see how, to see the arc of how the resolution progresses. So a lot of what we talked about already, so I'm not going to go over it again, but I do want to point out the reason that it's going up the mountain is because the tension can go up as you're moving through the process. It's not a bad thing, and I encourage you to try to stay with it. This image is designed to demonstrate that you can get up and over that peak and come out the other side towards that resolution. So if your employees need help to resolve their conflict, how do you know when you should step in versus bringing in someone else? There's a number of questions you can ask, like, how bad is the situation? Has this been going on for a long time? Is it affecting other staff in the organization? How much productivity is being lost to the conflict? What's been tried already? Those aren't necessarily going to get you to that definitive answer. So one of the first places to look is going to be, if you have one, what's your organization's policy or procedure on conflict? Ideally, that should give you a sense of how to proceed. You could talk to someone in your HR department if you have one, and get some guidance there, or talking to your supervisor if you're comfortable doing that, while still respecting confidentiality as you need to. Aside from going that more technical route, there's a couple things you can consider here, including your confidence level in dealing with the situation. Do you feel comfortable stepping in? How likely are the employees to share information with you versus someone outside the organization? Where's their trust level there? Employees may be worried about how much information will be shared with others in the organization or what's going in their file. So this is a conversation to have up front, but it can be really helpful to have someone that's new to the situation and outside of the organization for people to feel comfortable that what's being said isn't going to be held against them. So one of the things I like to do here is have a clear discussion up front about what is or what isn't being shared and to who. So if I'm called in to mediate a dispute between employees and that's been requested by their manager, I'm going to check in with their manager around what their expectation is in terms of the information that they want to be relayed back. And I let them know that I'm not going to be discussing the content of the mediation, but we'll let them know if and when we come to a resolution, what that resolution is. And for example, what the employees have agreed to do going forward, where they may need assistance from that manager. And so, checking in, are you the right person to be dealing with the situation? Like, are you going to be able to be seen by both parties as being, neutral or equally supporting both? And a quick point on equally here, there may be instances where you need to advocate more for one side than another in situations of power balances, or if you see someone trying to create a power imbalance. It's important to call these things out instead of trying to just stay out of them and stay neutral. We've talked about the potential for there to be an investigation. If you're not sure how to proceed, you may want to get legal advice. You may need to involve HR depending on your organization's policies. Actually, it would be a good idea to keep your HR in the loop on anything employee related. One piece of advice I will provide is to document everything, the conversations, who was there, if there were any witnesses, what your decision-making process was. This goes for both managers and employees involved in any conflict. I hope you don't need these notes, but you are better off having them if you do. So if you're looking for more support in resolving disputes in your workplace, here's how I can help you with that through mediation, either where I actually facilitate the dialogue between two parties or provide support and coaching for you as a manager that needs to mediate. My mediation focus is on working relationships, so helping people really get to a place of understanding each other so they can co-create an outcome that works for them so they can work together more effectively in the future. So that might be between a manager and employee, between two employees, between co-founders, even family business issues, or accommodation requests. I'm really focused on getting the parties engaged in the process so they can build out their resolution together. Again, I'm a certified workplace mediator and trainer. So if you're in a position where you're the one that needs to mediate an employee dispute, I can also support you with coaching for that. I find that it's really helpful for the parties to have some coaching prior to going to mediation, so you have a clear sense of what's important to you, what you think might be important to the other person, what messages you want to get across, and what you need to move forward. So this is part of the process I use for mediation. After everyone's agreed to participate, we start with 2 individual coaching sessions for each party, and then we schedule the 3-hour mediation. If we find we need more time, we can add that as necessary, but the point of doing the coaching sessions first is to get some clarity and really be prepared so we can do this efficiently. So that mediation package starts at $14.50 plus HST Canadian, and we can add additional hours as necessary. If you look at it in terms of the cost of stress and loss productivity, it can actually be a much less expensive investment. Now, I always do a complimentary consultation first so I can get to know the situation and make sure that I'm a fit. And if you're worried about getting the parties to come to the table, that's also one of my responsibilities. I do short consultations with each of them to ensure their consent to participate and let them know what to expect through the process. If you want some more information or to talk through your situation, to check if mediation's a fit, here's my scheduling link so you can book a time that works for you, or please just feel free to send me an email. And honestly, no problem is too big or too small to talk through. You deserve the support you need to reduce the stress around what you're going through and get a plan of action to deal with it. And I'm here to help you with that. So thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate your time and I hope this was useful for you. I'd love to hear what your takeaways were in the chat, so please pop those in below. And now we'll move to questions.